efficiency with on-grade travel.
Sure. Let me just, before I get to Councilor Murphy, I think Mr. Tony wanted to jump in.
So I understand that the idea of improving the MBTA looks really, really good. If they can do that, that's great. But the MBTA is unlikely to be able to come up with the funds to extend itself up into West Roxbury or into Dorchester or Roslindale. Right now, they're struggling to see if they can even meet their commitment to extend into Somerville and Medford. So they can make those types of improvements on the existing rail, but being able to get out into the neighborhoods and then further out into the Commonwealth, it's pretty unlikely they'll have the funds. I'm sure you've all read that and heard that discussion in the news recently.
Thank you, Mr. Tony. Councilor Murphy?
Not only that, Owen, they're looking at a $3 billion backlog right now just on maintenance at the MBTA. And our total city budget is about $2.6 billion. So the amount of money that they're looking to spend just to repair their infrastructure now and keep no increases in service, keep what they've got working in good working order, is about the same amount or a little bit more than it takes us to run the school department, the police department, the fire department for a year. So it's one of the reasons why this seemed to be a positive kind of look in my eyes, is that you could it's privately funded, and it's something that we could there's no recurring tax maintenance on it, and it's cleaner, safer, and I think the time is now for us to at least do a pilot program here in the city, and I recommend between North and South Station, and dovetail it into the MBTA's hubs and see how it works. That's my feeling. Judith?
Councilors, there is a light years difference between the existing systems and what's being discussed here. In terms of construction, the structure can be built off-site and put up very quickly, like within days or a week. I've seen a wind turbine built in Hull. It took a while to get the foundation in, but putting up the actual turbine was a couple of days. So it can happen very quickly. It also has extremely high capacity. Going in one direction, if you have the pods moving close together, you can carry as much as a 6-lane highway. So it can be very small and yet have extremely high capacity.
I just had a couple of questions around costs. And I know, Chris Osgood, you've been very patient. So if you have any questions through the chair, you can jump in and ask. But how would JPods or a company like it raise the necessary capital to begin this process?
It takes getting projects defined. In other words, nobody is going to invest money in
an idea.
Right.
It's got to be concrete.
We have to have a place that we are going to build. Like I think around Assembly Square or into the Seaport District from South Station look very attractive for places that you would have relatively low resistance to people objecting. And if we could get 1837 passed so we have a known regulatory environment. Because right now you come into it and you say, okay, you want to build, here's where you want to build. Go do a $2 million EPA study on why solar-powered transportation would be better than oil-powered. I mean, there's no defined regulatory framework for us to define costs against.
Okay.
But once we do, it costs you about 56 cents a mile to operate a car. It costs 4 cents a mile to operate these. Take away the parasitic mass, take away the stop-starts, and you cut the energy consumption, which means pollution, by 20 times. So that's what that conversion of 90 cents out of every dollar that's currently spent on congested travel in Boston into profit and customer savings is what attracted Amazon to buy Kiva Systems for 20 times what Bain Capital invested in them. And that capital flow is what will attract capital to invest in city infrastructure.
So we need a hard-bound plan before you can.
Well, we need the rule of law first. So the internet was created in 1969, the first radio telephone in 1946. Neither could commercialize against the federal government's central planning under the monopoly. When that was broken and declared unconstitutional in 1982, niche markets formed, and those then worked out and found customers and scaled to commercial viability. So that's exactly what I think will happen once 1837 is passed. We'll go propose niche things. We still have to get building permits. We still have to get all the normal things to build. 1837 just sets a regulatory framework.
So we're mentioning the MBTA a few minutes ago, and in actuality, with us providing a feeder service to the MBTA could actually become more profitable as more people are brought there. I think Judith might have some statistics that she could mention.
So the way I looked at it when I when the budget was being reviewed and set in 2012, I just looked at it. If you could double the fares, the MBTA would be making money. They wouldn't have required an extra subsidy. And if you use JPods or something similar to bring people to the T, to the trains, to the ferry, you're going to double the number of riders, and the MBTA will make money, period.
So more people would rather leave their car at home and find some way to come into the city via rapid transit. When we spoke to Councilor McCarthy, he was concerned about the huge number of people coming through Dedham down Washington Street. If we were able to have solar personal rapid transit coming down there, they could leave their cars at home and they wouldn't necessarily have to fill up Boston with excess vehicles during the daytime.
I would also like to look at putting protected bike paths under our rails. So my guess is if 1837 gets passed, us and our competitors, and we've got letters from our competitors that would like to come and locate in Boston. There's enough congestion in Boston to support multiple competitors. If we put protected bike paths under the rails, then the city becomes radically more bikeable.
1837 is a Mass Senate bill.
Yes.
That is in what committee now? Has it had a hearing?
It had the hearing in the Senate. It's a Senate bill. It's been through. So Senator McGee and Representative Strauss are the chairmans of that committee. If you guys could, if the city would ask them to get it out of committee, it'd be really nice.
It's the Joint Committee on Transportation.
Okay.
Here's when we met with Senator McGee, he's really strongly behind this. John Keenan, who's the co-chair from the Senate, is strongly behind it. Bill Strauss's aide, John Katz, said he wants to hear from somebody big. Boston's big, okay? If you spoke up, that bill would pass.
We don't have that kind of luck up there when we speak up all the time.
That's what they're waiting for.
But I'm not trying to, we've got a lot of home rule petitions up there that we've spoken on, and it doesn't seem to do us any good up there.
Well, this actually increases, not very many people come to you and say, geez, I'd really like to pay taxes.
No one does.
And we really want to pay 5% tax. And it's modeled very much after the cable television and the current utility models of we pay 5% of gross revenues. That fixes our costs. Everything becomes known. And we know then what we can do to tell capital to invest in these projects.
I had a few other financial questions, Mr. Chairman, but I don't think we can answer them until we have a framework for reference, I guess.
Well, a good rule of thumb is this is going to cost about $10 million a mile to build, but the first 20, 30 miles are going to cost us 2 to 3 times that. There's just a ramp, but the cost of that falls on us, not on the city. I also think governments could require a removal bond so that if the businesses were to fail, they would have to be removed to the grade, to ground level. And those are all fair things to ask.
Excuse me. I asked Ellen Douglas to come here from UMass Boston. As I mentioned to you, she's a professor. She has a tight window for being here. If the other speakers wouldn't mind, it'd be really nice if you could hear what she had to say. She's going to talk to you about the effect of climate on the city.
Hearing, doesn't she?
Yes, as long as other folks are fine with taking out of turn, before we get to that, I'd like to acknowledge we've been joined by my good colleague and friend, the District 5 City Councilor, Tim McCarthy. Did you have any opening statements or brief questions?
Just quickly, it's good to see you three again. Bill, I've heard a lot about you. You were very well represented in my office, by the way. And Chris, it looks like we're going to be busy if things like this happen. You know, I just want to echo quickly what Councilor Murphy said. You know, there's a real battle going on out in our streets between bikes and cars and pedestrians. You know, I am concerned, as I said to you, that other cities haven't been pushing this as fast as, you know, we always like to be number one, but we certainly don't want to be, you know, a guinea pig. So I'm interested to see as we delve deeper what other cities are having, you know, what their apprehensions are, what their concerns are. But ultimately, you know, something like this could be put together and you can move people without bothering traffic. And like you said, with the bike lanes, I know that we had a hearing the other day on bike lanes, and it was about a 3.5-hour hearing about safety, really keeping not only the pedestrians and the bikers safe, but as well as you know, the car drivers safe as well. So it's a very interesting topic. I'd love to see it in action, to be honest with you. I know the one is in West Virginia. You know, I'd love to see that in action. I did watch the film where, you know, the college kids are using it daily without issue, and I believe the stat was 110 million kids have been transferred on that thing without incident. You know, these are fantastic numbers. Again, Boston loves to be first, so I'm looking forward to working with Chris. And you know, Chris is a very progressive. A lot of good things have happened already under Chris, so I'm looking forward to you know, possibly some more good things happening. So I really don't have any questions. I've read up on this, and you three were very thorough at our previous meeting. So I'm excited to see where this goes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor McCarthy. All right, I will ask Dr. Douglas to please join us at this podium. But as she's coming up, I did want to give Chief Chris Osgood an opportunity for opening remarks. I mean, I guess I would just, again, reiterate, I appreciate the thought behind this. Some concerns that I have would be, you know, talking about taking public streets and public land to build this. So, Chris, did you want to touch upon challenges there, or just any preliminary thoughts you may have or questions?
Sure, thank you so much. And Councilor Murphy, thank you for calling this hearing. And Councilor McCarthy, thank you for joining. And thank you to all of you for the sort of the creativity and the ambition and the thoroughness of thought behind this idea. As you may know, Mayor Walsh is engaged right now in a long-term mobility plan for the city of Boston called Go Boston 2030. None of us are under the illusion that we are doing today what we need to be doing in 2030 to create an equitable, sustainable transportation network that unlocks economic opportunity for all. And so I really appreciate sort of all the thought that you guys have had into this. I have some questions which may be better for us to sort of dive into in a separate meeting at a later date, but there are certainly some general questions around feasibility that I would love to dive into with you, both construction feasibility, operation feasibility, and financial feasibility. On the construction side, and I appreciate the notion of the bond if something had to be removed, but to talk a little bit about in dense corridors, how you construct something like this, what types of footings you need, given what you already know about our sidewalk widths and our street widths, what this could actually look like in our city. And similarly, as we get into the operation side, really, can we actually get enough solar power to be able to run a transportation system? I'd love to sort of dive more into that at some point. And then on the financial feasibility side, to talk a little bit about what the cost for the rider would be to be able to actually pay back the cost for this to be a fully privately funded transportation network. All of those would be great to dive into separately, and we can definitely have this as a side conversation, however the council would like to have this. Love to learn more about 1837, the other regulatory rubrics or frameworks that you would be interested in exploring in addition to 1837? And since you did reference that there's other people in this room who have similar ideas, how you think about competitor networks being interoperable. Something of interest to the city is that notion of interoperability. So we are building networks that very easily work for our constituents to go from one mode to another, or from one type of system to another. I'm sure it's something you've given thought to, so I would love to dive into that. But again, I appreciate all of the thought that you guys have put into this. I'm excited by all that I'm learning this morning, and really appreciate Councilor Murphy and Councilor O'Malley and Councilor McCarthy and Councilor Baker for holding this hearing today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Douglas, please, I think your colleagues have allowed to take you out of turn, but I would urge you to please be brief.
Hi, I am Ellen Douglas, and I am at the School for the Environment at UMass Boston. Many of you may know that I've been looking at the impacts of sea level rise and climate change on Boston and New England for quite a while. And I was asked to be a part of this to give a larger context in why we need this kind of innovation in transportation in the future. So I always like to start with, if everybody's familiar with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that does a periodic assessment of the science of climate change and observations. And the last report that came out in 2013, there were some pretty stunning statements. One was that it's unequivocal that the Earth's climate is warming. Unequivocal is a word that the IPCC has not used before. It means they're virtually certain that this is true and happening, and since the 1950s, it's extremely likely. And they don't use these words lightly. They mean, when they say extremely likely that they have a greater than 95% confidence that this is true, that human emissions have been the dominant cause of this global temperature, and those emissions are predominantly carbon dioxide emissions. Other things, these statements are based on the fact that we've observed there's been a 40% increase in in carbon emissions since pre-industrial times, and they project based on future projections that we could see a warming of anywhere from 0.5 degree to almost 9 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on how much carbon we emit into the atmosphere into the future. And that most of the aspects that we are already observing on climate change will continue into the future, even if we were to bring our carbon emissions to zero. Another statement that I wanted to mention is that they say it's virtually certain that the ocean is warming, or it has warmed since 1970, and that they will continue to warm. And why this is important is you'll see in a minute. So what are we talking about when we're talking about carbon emissions? Well, we're talking about the carbon dioxide emissions that come predominantly from fossil fuel burning, as well as from land use change. And the colored band that you see on the graph shows the range of future projections for CO2 emissions. And then there's a line of dots that shows our observed, what we've been emitting for CO2 emissions historically and currently. And we have generally followed along the higher projections of CO2 emissions, which means that we can expect that we will follow the higher changes in temperature range in the future. And we're rapidly approaching the 2 degree centigrade target that the IPCC has stated beyond which will cause irreversible and very dangerous impacts due to this continued warming. Why this is important to us in the U.S., nearly 1/3 of our CO2 emissions come from transportation, so that means that what we do here today is relevant not only for Boston and the region, but also at a global scale. The reason that I'm here is to talk about the impacts of sea level rise, which is one of the more certain impacts of the warming that we have observed and that we project will continue. The graph I show here is from the U.S. National Climate Assessment that was released in 2013, and you see four colored lines there, the highest line being the sea level rise that we could expect if we do continue to follow the highest trajectory of CO2 emissions, meaning that we could see up to 2 feet, 0.8 meters of sea level rise by mid-century, and as much as 2 meters of sea level rise by the end of the century. And that also includes some large dramatic changes in temperature as well. And so those are pretty dramatic projections based on the highest emission CO2 emission scenarios. So I've been looking, my team and I have been looking at the impacts of this potential sea level rise and also the increase in coastal flooding due to hurricanes and nor'easters under future climates. And so I wanted to share a few maps, flood maps with you to show potential impacts for Boston itself. This shows current conditions. So we developed a high resolution hydrodynamic model to simulate hurricanes and nor'easters in conjunction with sea level rise. And if you can see some of the colored areas, for example, there's a green colored area in Boston, in East Boston, and there's some colored areas up by Charlestown. This is current vulnerability to flooding due to coastal storms, and that's around 1%. So we do have some vulnerability, but a limited extent of flooding that's potential under current conditions. But if we follow those future carbon emissions into the future, around 2030, we could see a much larger probability of flooding. So the green is more like a 2%. So the probability of flooding has not only doubled by chance, but it's also increased in extent. And then if we look out to 2070, you see that there's a much larger area that's vulnerable to flooding, including the areas behind the Charles River Dam, because at that point, sea level rise and combined storm surge could overtop or short circuit the Charles River and Amelia Earhart dams. So now we see a substantial amount of area in blue, which shows that the probability of flooding could be as high as 50% or more. So we're looking at the impacts of sea level rise having some pretty dramatic impacts on Boston. If we look at specifically at just those areas that have a 1% chance, that's the so-called 100-year flood event, then we see there's currently around a half a foot of flooding that's potential that could occur. But again, if we look into the future, we see those areas of flooding increase in extent as well as in depth, and the depths projected under the highest emission scenario by 2070 could be in the range of 4 to 5 feet in many areas of Boston. And so again, this because we have in the past been following that higher emissions trajectory, and if we continue to follow that in the future, we could see some pretty dramatic flooding impacts in Boston due to that. So I'm hoping that this very brief statement and these maps will support the following conclusions: that the warming that we're currently seeing on the planet is approaching the level beyond which dangerous impacts will be unavoidable, that Boston is particularly vulnerable to sea level rise and coastal flooding because we are a coastal city and because a lot of the city is on fill. The transportation sector is both a big source of CO2 emissions, which could be reduced by lower emissions transportation innovation, such as we're talking about today. And also the transportation infrastructure itself is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So we've got a two-sided impact there. And we do need to find solutions that reduce the emissions now in order to minimize our vulnerability to the impacts that we project for the future. So that's all I'd like to say today, and I have provided you with a statement as well.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. I appreciate touching on those points. One of the things I am most proud to have worked on with colleagues like Steve Murphy and Councilor McCarthy was when the council passed the Boston Energy Reporting and Disclosure Ordinance in November of 2013. We are on the right trajectory to lower our greenhouse gas emissions in the city by 25% in less than 5 years and by 80% by the year 2050. So this council is proud of that.
Need to continue to lead.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I did want to be respectful of everyone else's time who signed up to testify. I don't have any further questions for the panel.
I
Councilor
do
Murphy?
not, Judith.
There's an important point that I'd like to follow up on Dr. Douglas's comments. Solar personal rapid transit is easy to build. It will happen around the globe once it gets started. It could be the catalyst for cutting emissions around the globe in half, partly through transportation, by enticing people out of their cars and making it safe to bicycle so that more people bicycle. And partly because it's going to bring down the cost of solar and of energy storage so that you and I and other people who have buildings can put solar on our houses and on our businesses and storage so that then we don't depend on fossil fuel central power plants. So Boston could be the catalyst for cutting emissions in half around the globe and keeping the ocean in the ocean. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Osgood, do you have any closing thoughts or questions for the panel?
I don't, but again, I appreciate you calling this, and it's been a pleasure to listen and learn.
Thank you. And any other conclusionary remarks? Sir, we'll get to you. Have you signed up to, as long as you signed up to speak? Okay, we're good. Make sure you signed up. We're getting to that. Okay, well, I'll be calling your name shortly. All right, thank you, panel. I appreciate your time. You're welcome to stay here or sit and observe, and we're going to just begin going through in order of people signed up to testify. The first is Robert Hector. Oh, perfect timing, Mr. Hector. If you could just state over here, would be great. Thank you. Just say your name and your address or your affiliation. We'd ask all the public speakers to try to limit their remarks to 2 minutes. After Mr. Hector is Mike Stanley, and then Rochelle Rossi Kessel. So Robert Hector, Mike Stanley, Rochelle Rossi Kessel. You can, if you wouldn't, are you happy to sit, or if you want to stand?
Make
That's
yourself
fine.
comfortable.
That's fine.
Hi, my name is Robert Hector, and I represent the Greater Grove Hall Main Streets in Grove Hall, and I'm also president of the Washington Street Corridor Association. And I support the personal rapid transportation because, number one, as you know, from Forest Hill to Dudley Street, the elevated train has been taken down. With this, could replace that train that was there, because Roxbury is the only place that doesn't have any light rail or rail service. And you're talking about moving children to and from school rapidly. This is the easiest way to do it. It would eliminate a lot of the buses that are there. Also, we have a environmental problem that may occur, and I'm talking about the lab that's built